Good afternoon. Thank you all for attending today's advisor forum. Our topic today is advising with cultural competence at the forefront. My name is Ross Hawkins. I'm the director of the Academic Advising and Transfer Center at Missouri State University. And today we are going to be hearing from four panelists who will share some experience working with our diverse student body. I have come up with several questions that the panelists have been informed on, so they know that those questions that I will be asking, so they will be able to give remarks on those questions. I hope that we have time remaining at the end to address any questions that you all might have. So throughout the advisor forum today, please feel free to use the chat feature to ask the panelists questions. I also want to remind individuals that if you do wish to receive Master Advisor credit for this session, please make sure that you enter your name and your department in the chat feature. I also want to note that today's advisor forum is being recorded and it will be posted on the Mo State Advising YouTube channel within the next few days. So if you have individuals in your area who are unable to attend the session today from 12 to 1, know that they will be able to utilize the YouTube channel and still receive Master Advisor credit for that session. What I will do to begin is have the panelists introduce themselves, and then we will get into the questions that I have for the panelists for the advisor forum. So first, Dr. Horton, if you would begin with an introduction.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Leonard Orton. I am in media, journalism, and film. I've been at MSU since about fall of 2013. But I've been teaching since fall of 2009. My background is actually in reporting. I was a reporter / fill-in anchor for many years, and I look forward to this panel today.
Okay, thank you. Next, Andy Oliver.
Good afternoon, all. I'm Andy Oliver. I am the director of the Disability Resource Center here on campus and work primarily with students with disabilities at MSU.
Hi, thanks, Andy. Next, Patrick.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Patrick Parnell. I'm the Director of International Services here at Missouri State. Our office is responsible for our international student population, which primarily includes all students who are attending MSU on a foreign visa. And I've been in this position since fall of 2013. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Patrick. Shai.
Did you say my name? Okay, it's like pausing really bad, sorry. So my name is Shai Wells. I am the Assistant Director of Multicultural Resource Center and the Director of LGBTQ Student Services. And I have been at Missouri State, keeps pausing, sorry. I have been at Missouri State since June of this year, but I am a Missouri State graduate. So I graduated here and went to school here, so.
Okay, thank you. So the first question, as a predominantly white institution, what unique challenges face our diverse students? So Leonard, if I could start with you.
Ross, thank you so much for that question. I actually have the unique experience of being a part of two HBCUs, historically Black colleges and universities. I did my undergrad at Tuskegee, and then I attended Florida A&M, and then I also came back to teach at Florida A&M. And so going from those institutions to coming to a place like Missouri State, in terms of just the overall academics, a lot of that stuff pretty much is the same, but in terms of how the students see themselves as they relate to the place itself is a little different. So for example, here at Missouri State, we have what's called an MRC, right? We have a place for them to go, right? And you know, for me, that was a little different because when you come from an HBCU, the whole campus is understood to be your environment, right? And so it's not uncommon to walk around campus at FAMU to see the Kappa stepping, or to see the Qs, or to see the Alphas or the Deltas doing their thing. And it's like the whole campus is theirs, or at least they feel that way. But here at Missouri State, the students, the African-American students, they tend to feel as though they're like they kind of have to walk on eggshells a little bit, where they have to kind of claim spaces, and diversity sort of happens in boxes. So here's another example. So you might have an event where Hispanic night. Well, Hispanic night is on Sunday, it's at 9 o'clock. And then after Hispanic night is over, we're going to give you a survey. We want you to tell us how you thought, what you thought about it. Well, you know, at HBCU, there is no Hispanic night. Like the whole thing is just yours. So that's kind of just a shift in mindset, where a student goes from feeling like the whole campus is theirs, and it's all there for them to enjoy, versus at a place like, or like a, you know, predominantly white school, where things are a little bit more institutionalized, a little bit more boxed in.
Okay, thank you. Andy?
I'm going to take a little bit different take on this, because we are also a predominantly non-disabled campus. And so as the population of students I work with, students with disabilities, are navigating this campus, some of the challenges that they face are, for students with physical disabilities, some of our environments on campus are not fully accessible. We had a student in a wheelchair bring up that there are bathrooms on campus that they cannot easily get into and navigate through. And so that means that in order to use a restroom, they have to potentially go to a different building on campus, or you know, to a different floor, or that sort of thing. We also have some challenges sometimes with just perception of students who are, you know, a lot of students with disabilities, those are invisible disabilities. They don't have something that's visible. They're not in a wheelchair. They're not using a cane or a guide dog or anything like that. So it's not a perceptible thing to see that they have a disability. But often those disabilities, those invisible disabilities, they can be questioned on that, and it's difficult for them to have to always explain, I've got a learning disability, I've got ADHD, I've got mental health concerns and those sorts of things. And so just the fact that they have to explain themselves constantly is problematic, and so makes it difficult for those students.
Okay, thanks, Andy. Patrick, and then Shai.
Along the lines of Andy's comments, in relation to the question, which to me indicates that diversity equals non-white, and I'm looking at through a lens that diversity equals international based on my responsibilities. And through that lens, it's about culture, it's about race, it's about certain expectations, it's about immigration status, it's about different things that I think are more than just non-white. And so when thinking about it in those terms, the key points that really come up in terms of what these students are facing, number one would be isolation, just because of all those differences in comparison to others. Misunderstanding, but I think that's across the board with any diverse population, of course. And then barriers, and barriers instituted in many different ways, whether they're from within, they're from outside, and then how do we navigate those barriers to help these students be successful?
So I'm also going to take a completely different angle as a person who is a student currently, but also a newer student. I think one of the things that people especially even advisors. One of the things that I really struggled with as a student was the fact that people thought that I had to be treated differently or I had to be having specific experiences. That was something that I struggled with a lot, and I'm still currently struggling with it. I have people that often come to me and they want to talk about the Black issue. How do I work with a Black student? How do I work with a multicultural student? And if I'm not and have not had those experiences? And I think on a regular basis, I have to inform people and educate them that a student is a student. It's not about being a Black student, a gay student. It's about being a student. Students should have, they come here to do one thing. They have one goal. We want to graduate, we want to be successful, we want to move on and go through those things. And I think that's very, it's one of the things that I struggle with the most, because it's a very common question that I get, is how do I handle, or how do I? And I have to explain to people all the time, students are students. And yes, there's going to be small things maybe that we need to change. But when it comes down to, at the end of the day, all students want is to be successful. They want to get into a career. And so I encourage everyone to not look at students for their race or for their culture, but look at them for they are students who are in programs who just want to be successful and they want to thrive. I don't know how many times I had in situations where people were just like, well, I'm so sorry that these things are happening. And I always have to explain to people, like, that's not the reality for me. I do and am affected by every issue, regardless if it's a Black issue, if it's a white issue, if it's a political issue. We're all affected by those things. And so individualizing personal experiences to just me is something that I always tell people, like, don't be that guy. Don't be that person that feels like you have to apologize for everyone on top of those things. Instead, just be a person that guides me to what I'm here for, my purpose of getting into a career, graduating, being successful, walking at that graduation line, like that's what we're looking for. And so I constantly try to reiterate that to people, because it seems to be that there's a common confusion with that about how you handle specific populations or certain people, whenever at the end of the day we all have one goal.
Okay, thanks. For the second question, panelists, I am just going to have you go as you wish. So I won't call on you from this point forward. Just whoever wants to step in and answer first, please do so. So question 2, what strategies do you use to build rapport and meaningful relationships with students who have very different experiences than you? Any pitfalls to avoid?
I think for me, one of the things that I genuinely try to focus on is listening, being an active listener. It's really easy to make assumptions, but it's also really easy to be an active listener. And most of the times you can hear what students are feeling or what they're going through just by listening to them. I don't know how many students have came into my office and we were supposed to have a really great, good conversation, and they were tearful. They were going through a lot of things. They just wanted someone to listen, someone to advise them and talk with them and allow an open space. And that's one of the things that I have really started doing, is not providing my opinion, but allowing students to really open up and have those kind of conversations with me, not forcing it, making sure that it's very, like, when we're talking, I'm like, hey, if you would like to talk about this, if there's something you would like to elaborate on, know that I'm here to support you, and making sure that they are aware, that it's at any time. Being an advisor for me is, more than just coming in that one time of the semester. If you need something other than that, please use that as an opportunity. Use open office hours as a chance, because I think that's another thing is, students get kind of worked up in this idea, like it has to be this 8 to 5 kind of thing. I can't ever send you or talk to you at any other time, and like every moment has to be accounted for. And sometimes that's just not true. I like to be an advisor who would be open to talking to you, if I don't have anything going on at 8 o'clock in the morning, or if it's 4:45 and I'm about to leave, know that, I'm here for you and I support you. And that's kind of how I build a rapport with a lot of my students. And I have students that see me on a regular basis now, just sometimes for no reason. They'll just come and talk, and, I'm working through little small things. So that's kind of what I do to help.
I guess I can go. One of the things that I talk with advisors and others about as they are meeting with students, a lot of times walking into our office is a really difficult thing to do. Students are admitting that they need help, and that is not necessarily a natural thing for us as humans to do. And so often students who are struggling in classes, who are struggling in their social lives, in their residence halls, they are talking with other people across campus about various difficulties, and one of those may end up being a disability. And when they bring that up, a lot of times people will refer them to our office, but they don't feel comfortable coming to our space. And so I try to get this message out as much as possible. If the student is comfortable talking to you in your space, and they're willing to allow someone from our office to come and have a conversation, we are happy to do that. Walk across campus and meet with them in your space, because that's where they're comfortable, and that's they obviously have a comfort level of being able to say, hey, I've got a disability and I need help with this when they're with you. And so we want to make sure that that is something that we can do. And then it makes it easier once you've got a friendly face, somebody in the office, to then follow up and come to the Disability Resource Center. I think the other thing is, a lot of times when students come into the office, it's because they are kind of in a crisis situation in a class. Listening to what they have to say about that situation, but also accountability is huge. And talking with students and saying, you've kind of gotten yourself into this situation, and talking reality with them. We will try and work with them to help fix the situation, see if we can salvage a class, get them accommodations in place if they're not using them, but also being realistic about sometimes that's not going to fix everything. And so I think sometimes that is a wake-up call that the student needs, and often they come back if you're honest with them and are willing to work through some of those difficulties in the future.
So I've actually had 2 conversations in the past 2 days with 2 African-American students. These were both women. One is a current student, and the other is actually a professional in the news business. And the conversations were similar, and they sounded something like this. Horton, I don't feel like I belong here. I don't feel like I sound like them. I don't feel like I act like them. I don't feel like I belong here. And so what are they really saying? So I wanted to kind of piggyback off of something that the other panelists had said about, students not making them feel like they're different because they're of a diverse population. We don't. However, a lot of times what ends up happening is because of what's going on in their brain, they bring that to the table. They come into these experiences where maybe they haven't, maybe they're first generation, or maybe they just never been in a environment where there are a lot of people who don't look or sound or quote unquote act like them, and they're wanting to be professional, and they're wanting to be accepted, and they're wanting to do the job the best they can, but they've got some hangups. And so I think one of the things that I do, and one of the things I think that advisors can do, is just reminding people, no matter what their ethnicity is, that they're not inferior. Like, just because you did not grow up in a certain area, or just because you don't sound like a certain person, that you're like less than or lower than, or like you have lower expectations, or and so a lot of that, what I fight against is just the mental piece. It's just convincing them that yes, you belong here, and actually you're smarter than half of the people on my roster. You just don't realize it. And these are things that you've told yourself. And so I think that mental piece is pretty huge.
I would comment that in past experience in working with diverse international populations is that establishing or showing empathy with boundaries will result in empowerment for students. And what that means, at least in this context, is that they may be up against barriers that I can do something about, or perhaps I can't. But let me put myself in your place. Let me understand where you're coming from. Let me know how you approach this situation, and then what are the possible solutions. And they may not be the ultimately right solution for you, but just keeping it realistic so that you can be, or so that a student can be empowered to be as successful as they possibly can be. And then I would also say, as it relates to diverse cultures, is that, of course, excitement and exploration about who they are. Why are they here? What did it take for them to get here? And what do they hope to accomplish here at Missouri State? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Question 3. What tips can you offer advisors and faculty in regards to creating a welcoming environment?
I'll just jump in after what I said, because I think it equates well, is that know your audience across the board, but know your audience. If there's different norms and regulations across the board that they must abide by that are different than your standard template or your standard SOP, know that in advance so that you can best serve them.
I would like to add to that. Shy Wells earlier said listening. Talk about their families. How's your, if you allow them, they'll tell you all about their brothers and their aunties and their uncles, and don't let it just be academic all the time. Ask them about how their brother's doing, how their sister's doing, how your grandmother's doing, and that really goes a long way to kind of creating that community away from home.
And to add on what he was saying, I think a part of listening is also being able to hear what kind of resources students need to have access to. One of the biggest disconnects with us is we don't know about the things that exist for students. Unfortunately, there's a lot of students that come to my office who are looking for things that are really an SAC office. But the best part about that is I know that it's going to be in the SAC office, or I know it's going to be in the DRC, or I know it's going to be in the library or TRIO or Bears Lead, because I've made those connections to hear, oh, this student needs this resource. Well, I know exactly where that resource is. So familiarizing yourself is probably one of the most welcoming things that you can do. For me personally, I know lots of resources. I have connected with a lot of people. So when someone says, I need to know where this office is that does this thing with this space, I at least have a basic understanding of where those things can be. I mean, I've called Ross's office, I've called the Career Center. I haven't called Patrick's office, but I have called Andrew's office. These are all the places that I know that I can connect students with, because I start to think about, most of the time they're telling me this because they want a solution, right? Like they want me to have the answer to that. And so knowing those resources and being able to connect them, if you don't know the answer with someone else, is the most welcoming thing that you can do. And it really strives for students to be successful, because then they don't have to stress or think about, oh, am I going to this office when it should have been this office, or this resource when it should have been this resource. And teaching yourself as well, what things are free. I always like to tell students majors and the counseling center and the DRC, these are free things. These are things that you can do and you can have access to, and it won't cost you anything, because as a college student, money is, it's a thing, and we stress through it all the time. So I make sure in the most welcoming manner that I educate myself to educate others on the importance of free and accessibility, because those are the two things that students are looking for all the time.
I would just expand on that a little bit. Our office is often confused with the state disability office, where people will go for SSI insurance, or we'll get calls from people, we'll get calls from students. Students will come in thinking that that our office is the place to get service. And I think it is in some cases, but in a lot of cases, we also don't have the right answers for them. We're not academic advisors, and we're very clear with students that academic advising, they need to go to their advisor, and work with them. And so as we're working through figuring out what it is, the information that they're actually requesting, the information that they need, we will find those answers for them so that we can point them to the correct person, rather than just saying, oh, you should go to your academic advisor, oh, you should go to this office. And, you know, if it means finding a specific building and room so that they have the right person to go to, if it means giving them a phone number, because a lot of times students will get frustrated because they just get bounced, and we want to make sure that we're not bouncing students, and make sure that they have the information when they leave our office for where they need to get those answers. And if we have the answers within our office, we'll work with them to meet that need as well. So.
Okay, thanks again. Next question. Academic advisors are typically empathetic, good listeners. However, there are times when listening and offering empathy doesn't seem enough. What else can we do to support minoritized students?
That's a really good question, Ross. Whenever I ran up against a roadblock, whether it be advising or whether it be in the classroom, typically what I try to do is bring in others, maybe that I've taught before, or maybe some professionals that are in the community that can sort of speak to their specific needs, because I don't have all the answers. I don't, and I'm a guy. I'm not a woman, and a lot of my students are women, like 80% of them in the journalism major. So a lot of the conversations either I try to have, but there's just some specific conversations that it's better suited that someone else come in, either a former student who has gone on to be successful, say in the field of journalism, say they're on-air news reporter now. And I'll go back to the conversation we had at a previous session about natural hair. So, you know, you bring in someone like at a local beauty salon. I know several people that own salons here in Springfield, and that can come in and speak to, like, you know, different styles and things of that nature. And so, yeah, I feel like I don't have the answers all the time. And so that's when I call in my resources. I call in people that I know that are either probably closer to their age, or people that, or where they're trying to go, and have them come and either Zoom them in or bring them in, or send my students to them. So that way you're not having to do all of this by yourself. And, you know, even within your department, you know, if you're the advisor and maybe you don't have the right things to say or the answers, send them to someone else down the hall that you can bring in. I've done that many times. I've brought in Tim White, who is our master advisor for our department. I'll bring Tim in, and all three of us will just sit there and figure it all out. So that way that student still feels supported and it's handled right then. You're not having to wait until tomorrow or next week or things like that. So yeah, bring in other people.
I will say, as the director of LGBTQ student services, allowing what students feel comfortable with to also grow on you is something that a lot of people are currently coming to my office for. But you don't have to understand everything about LGBTQ students or staff or faculty members, right? You're not going to know everything, but it is important to acknowledge whenever someone has requested that kind of respect or transparency, because a lot of the issues that students are struggling with is people don't respect pronouns. People don't respect experiences or sexuality. And so reading the room. I mean, that's one of the biggest things. There's a lot of times whenever people are using microaggressions as to communicate, or we're not respecting someone's pronouns when they were vulnerable enough to have that conversation and address that. But also in the flip side of that, understanding that mistakes are going to be made. So holding ourselves accountable to understand that there's no perfect way to handle every situation, especially when it comes to the transition of LGBTQ students here on campus, or staff or faculty members, or even community members. You may not know everything, but respecting whenever someone has came to that conversation with you and wants you to address them in this manner. And that's in the classroom or in an advisement meeting. It's really difficult for students to be vulnerable, especially whenever they're 80% of students are going to come out in higher education. They probably have no idea what things they're experiencing or what they're going through. So guiding and pretty much enabling others to understand that that's going to be a part of this process as well. But respect is a human right. It's around the room. If you want something and it's a part of your human right, you should be able to have that. And so I constantly encourage people to be more understanding towards that as well, to work with students, because there's a lot of issues that LGBTQ students are currently going through, and their academics and their advising should not be one of them. And those are just one of the places that I really want to implement that conversation for cultural competence, because I think it is new. And so a lot of people are like, oh, I don't really like changes, but it's a part of who we are. And it's a part of what we've committed to at the university, to be culturally competent and to make sure that students have a good experience here.
Shai has already emphasized knowing your resources across campus and beyond, and that's extremely important. And especially when we here at Missouri State, we have an international care and advocacy team that's dedicated to looking through that lens of students coming from other cultures and how to help them in crisis, or how to help them navigate different resources on campus. Or the I Succeed Center, which again, looking through the lens of people coming from multilingual backgrounds and multicultural backgrounds, how can we help them be successful in class or manage issues when it comes to their academic landscape? That's what I would say.
I think most of what I was going to say has already been covered, but I would just reiterate, resourcing students with what we have here on campus. We have a lot of resources for our students that a lot of them don't know about. And so being able to take the conversation that you're having with the student and find the correct resources to refer them to, and whether that be the counseling center or tutoring services or academic coaching, or all of those great things that we have for our students are really important as we're working with them.
Okay, and this will be our final prescribed question. So please, again, attendees, use the chat feature and enter any questions that you would like our panelists to address today. But my final question, and Shai, you started to touch on this a bit. How do you come back from making an unfortunate mistake? For example, a microaggression, in order to reestablish a working relationship with the advisee?
So I always use in safe zone training, acknowledge what you can do, but accept what you cannot. And one thing that you can always do is understand that correction is key. One of the biggest things that people as a human race we struggle with sometimes is accountability, especially in the dynamic that some of us are in. Some of us have bachelor's degrees, some of us have PhDs, some of us have master's degrees, some of us have been here for years, some of us are associate professors. I mean, all the different things. So when you piece all of those things together, sometimes there is a dynamic or things that just, make it really difficult to kind of build that relationship, because there's a power structure. Even though we don't think about it, there is usually a power structure in a lot of relationships. So I always tell people how you recover from that is not apologizing. One of the biggest things that people feel that they always should do is say that I'm sorry for a mistake that they've made. But many of the professors and individuals that I've talked to have really started to emphasize that I'm sorry requires someone to say that it was okay. So that in itself is a problematic scenario, because you're saying, oh, I'm sorry that I've made this error. And then the person's response is supposed to be, oh, it's okay that you made that error, when it's not okay, right? Like acknowledging that it's okay is just a response that you're supposed to give to an I'm sorry. So what I've started working with in my safe zone training is having people rebrand themselves and start thinking about, instead of saying I'm sorry, saying I acknowledge that I've made this mistake and I will do better. And that's hard. That's really hard to ask of people sometimes. But at the same time, the power that it gives to a student to know that you acknowledge the mistake that you've made and that you're willing to think through a better response for the next time is so empowering, especially in the power structure and the dynamic that some of us are in. Students they usually don't have a lot of power in those dynamics. And so that's one of the biggest things that I always encourage people, acknowledging and not apologizing, because an apology just means that we're moved on, but an acknowledgement means that I've accepted, I understand, and I will do better.
Yeah. I'm going to make a statement, and it might come off, a little harsh, but this is how I really feel. We all have ways that we feel on the inside about things, politically and otherwise. And my personal opinion, if your loyalties that you're hanging on to outweighs respecting the student that you're working with, you probably shouldn't be in this profession. You probably shouldn't be an advisor. You probably shouldn't be a teacher. You should probably do something else to where you don't have to, have your values compromised, so to speak. But if you made an honest mistake about something and you're willing to, like what Shai said, if you're willing to acknowledge it, then yes, that's what you absolutely should do. And I've had to do that many times, not really in advising as much, but more so in teaching. And I've had to update my syllabi every year because of something I did the previous semester. Like, shouldn't have done that. Let me update it for the spring semester and maybe we can do better, and I'll approach it. I'll be a little bit more equitable in my grading, for example, starting in the spring. But if there are some things that are inside of you, that's some value points that you just can't get past, and it's a constant struggle, and you're just holding it in, and it's going to come out one day, you may want to give a serious assessment to yourself and ask yourself, do I, you're having this conversation about pronouns, is this, do you really want to be here and have to accommodate, where we are right now? And that's just being honest.
Yes, definitely. On a more micro level, I would just say that understanding that what you may feel is not exactly your fault based on the situation could be completely perceived differently from your student or your client. An example of that is me butchering a student's name, and I will think, well, maybe I'm not linguistically talented in that area, but understanding that that's probably the 50th time that's happened to that student today or this week, and it may affect your immediate relationship because they're done. They're done with that barrier, and just coming to terms with that.
Again, I think a lot of this has been covered, but the acknowledgement of your error and mistake is important. Students need to know that we are human and we make mistakes. There's a huge power dynamic between faculty and staff and students, and sometimes that perception of power in faculty and staff is scary. And so students need to know that we are human, we make mistakes, and that we're willing to own up to that and work through that with them.
Okay, well, thank you, panelists, for addressing those questions. I know that just in the short amount of time we've spent together so far, I've learned multiple things that I can incorporate into my advising style. Next, again, feel free to unmute or enter a question for the panelist in our chat feature. Okay, Shai, the first question comes to you from Kelly Wood. Can you talk a little bit more about the Safe Zone training and perhaps the next time that you plan to offer it?
Yes, so Safe Zone training is a two-step training. It is 2 hours and 30 minutes. So it is an hour and 15 minutes per each course. And it talks about two really important things. So the first thing is advocacy and being a safe zone. So once you take this course and you have this sticker, the things that you may be experiencing, the conversations that you may have, and how you can be a supportive ally. And the second part of safe zone training is history. So it talks about history all the way from the 1920s for LGBTQ individuals all the way up until 2022, most recent court cases, and how those things correlate. And then we really try to focus on how we're going to implement these kind of conversations. So one of the things that we're going to work on next semester is being more involved. So maybe adding an extra 30 minutes to do more interactive opportunities to talk, but that hasn't been confirmed yet. The next time that we will have a safe zone training, because students don't come back until way towards the end of the semester, I'm going to try to open some up before students get back, but then also open some up in February. And then Women's History Month is just really busy, so I don't know. We'll see if we can get in there, but yeah. So yeah, that's safe zone training.
Yeah, and thanks, Shai. I previously went through Safe Zone training at the university several years ago, and then I attended Safe Zone training with Shai. And I can say that if you have previously experienced Safe Zone training, this is different. It is a different format. You will learn new things that you haven't learned previously through Safe Zone trainings at Missouri State. And so I encourage you, even if you have completed that training in the past, take advantage of this great opportunity that Shai is providing to learn some additional details.
Yeah, and you will get master advisory credits. I've worked with Ross's office as well to do that. And then also adding, someone asked how you sign up. So you just go to Safe Zone and the Missouri State homepage. I know that's going to change next semester. So you can just type in Safe Zone at Missouri State. And then there's a sign up in there, and it'll send you a confirmation email. And that's kind of how that process will work once you get signed up.
Okay, great. Thanks for entering it in the chat. And Julia, thanks for that comment. I agree. Okay, what other questions do you have for our panelists?
I have a question for Andrew, if I could ask.
Yeah.
From a disability standpoint, I'm in the occupational therapy standpoint, and we, speak about one aspect of cultural competence or cultural humility being the language that we use, and it's really sensitive and respectful language. And there is debate between person first and identity first language. And so I didn't know if in your interactions with individuals with disabilities, I'm using person first right now, have you seen the students trend toward having an identity first recognition?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. It used to be that in education we were always taught that person first language is the way to go. You know, we would talk about students with disabilities and you know, that sort of thing. That has kind of shifted as we have seen more advocacy and more awareness of disability as an identity that people with disabilities embrace. And I think there are a lot of different schools of thought on this, but there are a number of different disabilities, blind and visually impaired, deaf, hard of hearing, the students on the autism spectrum, neurodiverse population. A lot of those communities are very much into identity first. And so the deaf community, you'll hear about Big D Deaf. So that is somebody who is sorry, I accidentally muted my my microphone, but Big D Deaf is the someone who is deaf, cannot hear, and part of the deaf community. And so that is a culture, just as the blind community is a culture, and they you know, work very closely together. So going back to your question, I think there's that shift in moving towards the identity first. Until a student identifies as being within one of those groups that is identity first, we tend in our office to stick with the person first language and you know, work through kind of how to address that identity with them. A lot of students don't identify as being disabled. A lot of our students with mental health difficulties, a lot of students with learning disabilities, or our veterans population who are coming back and may have injuries or mental health as well. They may not identify as being disabled, so we still use that person first language to make sure that we are sensitive to that issue in our office. So
thank you.
yeah.
Okay. What advice would you give in situations when students express that they prefer an advisor that is either a person of color or who has more experience advising students of color? This is an understandable request, but also a challenge at a predominantly white institution. So thank you for the question.
So personally, I think this situation is very tricky. Like I said, I'm a Missouri State graduate. Missouri State is a predominantly white institution. And so at some point, I think the first thing is trying to figure out what exactly they're looking for. Because I think it can be really easy to assume that it's maybe just because of the fact that maybe they don't think you're culturally competent, or it could be more than what you're able to achieve. But I also feel like in some aspects, addressing with students that you would still like to work with them. You know, you would still like to know what ways that you could be a better advisor for them. And then if not, I don't really know, Ross, if we have an option to change advisors. Like, I've had some students that have been like asked those types of questions, and I've told them, what is it that your advisor is not giving you? Because the issue really comes down to, in my personal experience, students just want to be with another person that looks like them. And I absolutely understand that. But we also have to take into consideration, like you said, we're at a predominantly white institution first, but also how do we educate others and allow them to be more culturally competent if we limit the kind of individuals that they work with? Because then I'd say I play the advocate on the other side of this. They come to my office with the assumption that I would know and have every African-American experience, Latinx experience, when I don't. So I could just be as incompetent as the next person. And that's been a big issue, because then we create this conversation that it's a Black versus white, a Latinx, or versus white, Asian versus Black. It's a whole thing. So advocating is going to be the first part of this. What is it exactly that you're looking for, and can I accommodate that? Because sometimes it is deeper than that. And so how do we get to that point? First, by advocating and just saying, is there something that I could do for you? Because also advising is set up based off your college a lot of the time. So it's going to be really difficult if you need to go to the MRC when you're a nursing major. Like, I would love to advise, but I may not be the best option. And that's the reality aspect as well. So keeping in mind the reality of the situation for students, because sometimes that misses the mark. And I want to advise students to always make sure that they're making the best choice. Now, a problematic advisor is something different. So if a student's like, this individual's problematic, I don't want to work with them, that's completely different than I just don't want to work with them because. And that's the advocacy part that you have to work through. So sometimes it is having those de-escalation conversations and trying to reel the situation back into the reality, because it's easy to throw the reality all the way out the window, and then we're just doing the extremes. And so sometimes you have to reel that back into the reality for the student. Is it because I'm a bad advisor, or is it just because you don't want me as an advisor because of, X, Y, and Z? And then maybe if we can address that situation, we could either understand why we need a different advisor, or try to reel the situation back into, this may be a really good option for you. Because I've had students that also have requested that from me, but specifically nursing majors, and I'm like, I don't know anything about nursing. I want to do this for you, right? I want to be that person for you, but like, I probably wouldn't be your best option because I'm not familiar.
Yeah, and Shai, I echo what you just said. I really appreciate the reply that you just gave to that question, because I do think there's an important distinction there between having an opportunity to learn together with a student as an advisor, while also recognizing that there are multiple people at the university who can serve in a mentorship role that may allow for that also piece that they may feel as if they're missing from their academic advisor. There are some programs that have multiple advisors. There are other academic programs where there may be one advisor, so it may be relatively difficult to switch to another advisor. In the event that what Shai had mentioned, where if a student is, unhappy with an advising experience, they are not able to connect with an advisor. Obviously, for those students, we want them to contact a director of a center or a department head to help through those specific issues. But Shai, thanks for that reply.
And I think just to add on to that, one of the most important things I'm going to go back to that I will continuously reiterate for everyone is knowing the resources. Sometimes it's not the academic advisor that they need. They need a mentor. They need a group. They need an organization. They need a counseling session. These are all the other things that come along with that. And I think that also goes back into knowing what your role is as an academic advisor. I'm an academic advisor, and if you need X, Y, and Z, I can find that for you. And I think that's super important, because a lot of the times it gets confusing. You know, what is the role of an academic advisor? And if you're not giving me full therapy sessions whenever you're just my academic advisor, that can be just a simple fix, right? We can be like, oh, okay, so you don't need a new academic advisor. You need a new resource. You need me to connect you with someone else, because that has been a very common conversation for me as well with students. Is they'll come to me and they'll be like, oh my gosh, I don't like this person, none of this matches up. And I'm like, oh, well, you're wanting a therapist out of an academic advisor, or you're wanting a career center out of an academic advisor, whenever really we just need to get you set up with the career center, or we need to get you set up with the DRC, because this is what you're having this issue. And so those are the kind of things that also is going to be really important as your role as advisor, because sometimes it's not you that's the problem, it's the student not knowing where they need to take the problem.
Okay, well, thank you to our panelists today for providing such wonderful information to us. Andy, Patrick, Shai, and Leonard, the advising community appreciates you sharing your experiences, providing tips and advice on how we can continue to improve our advising practices. So on behalf of our attendees today, thank you. Again, this concludes our advisor forum. Please join us next week for our final 2 advisor forums on Tuesday and Thursday. Tuesday in person, Thursday via Zoom. And again, on behalf of our students, our faculty, staff, thank you for what you're doing to help our students on a daily basis. Thanks, everyone. Goodbye.